This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings up a movie or a television show that traumatized them as a child.
This week we are so excited because we have author, filmmaker, journalist, film programmer, and co-founder of the Theory of Film Night, Heidi Honeycutt, whose new book, I Spit on Your Celluloid, The History of Women Directing Horror Movies, is out now wherever you buy books. Welcome to the show, Heidi!
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I'm so, excited to be here. This is, awesome. And I love this podcast. And so I love hearing about what people get scared by, especially when they're little kids stuff. So this is a real treat for me, and I appreciate it quite a bit.
We're really excited to chat with you, and your pick I had never seen before, so I'm very excited to dig into that one. But before we do get to that, let's start with your new book. Can you tell listeners a little bit about I Spit on Your Celluloid?
Yeah, thank you. So I Spit on Your Celluloid, the history of women directing horror movies, because otherwise you would have no idea what it's about by just the first part of the title. So it's a film history book basically about literally the history of women directing horror movies. It's a horror history book rather than like an academic study. I don't really do a lot of analysis. I do talk about what's in films and stuff like that, but mostly it's about how these films were made, why they were made, and what was going on in the world at the time that allowed these films to be made, which is what I find interesting about film. But I thought that it would be really cool to focus on the phenomenon of women as directors of horror movies, because that seems to be something that it's been written about and it hasn't. You know what I mean? There's been, in the last 10 years, we've had a lot of people talking about it and writing about it, but I noticed that there's been no place where all of the history of it has really been gathered. There's bits and pieces in places.
Yeah.
And some films are much more famous than others. So we'll get you can get a book about Near Dark, for instance, and everything that happened on the making of this. But there's so many other films that just kind of have never been really talked about. So I did it.
So you kind of said that, there's plenty that haven't been talked about. Did you find a gem that no one seems to either talk about or know about in your research?
Yeah, there's been a couple. So one that I think I would probably recommend to people who are horror fans. That's kind of what my criteria is. It's would I tell other horror fans to go watch this? So there's a 1919 silent film from Austria. Actually, Austria. And it's by a woman named Louise Fleck. And she actually had a co-director who was her husband, but they made a ton of films together. But this one film is called Die Ahnfrau, which is German for the ancestress. And so it probably wouldn't have been called that in English. It probably would have been called The Ghost or whatever. But in German, it made more sense. And it's a gothic horror film set in an old, crumbling medieval castle. And there's this family these nobles that have always lived in this castle. And whenever someone in their family is about to die, this ghost of someone in the way past of the family who was cursed appears to them. And so that's how they all know when someone's about to die in their family. And so, of course, she appears. And so there's all kinds of, family intrigue and curses and things going on. And it's shot in this very stylized German expressionist style. And in fact, it might be the first German expressionist horror film.
Wow.
Right up there with, Caligari and Vampire, which I don't think is a very good film, but it definitely isn't a German expressionist film. There's a lot of really good ones too, so we'll talk about those. But yeah, so when I found out about this film and I was really doing a deep dive into this director, I was really surprised that this film was not amongst those others, because it very much does fit in with the rest of the German expressionist horror films, and I don't know why. It has never been as popular or as discussed. She also has a few other horror films that she made. She actually directed what I would say is the first feature-length horror film directed by a woman in 1912, which is an adaptation of the novel Trilby, aka Three Tales of Terror, which is a novel by Georges du Maurier about a young singer who is hypnotized by this. His name is Svengali, actually, is the character's name, and that's kind of where we get that term, Svengali. So he kind of enchants and hypnotizes this beautiful young singer to be in his power, and there are other stories in the novel as well that take place, but that's the one that's been focused on in cinema the most, is that story. And of course, there's a 1930 version, I think, starring John Barrymore. That's pretty good, and it's called Svengali, I believe. He plays Svengali in it. But that was the first adaptation of it.
Wow.
So I would consider that the first feature-length horror film directed by a woman. But there's others, too. It's only just really coming out now in October on Blu-ray, but there's a film called Hollywood 90028.
I've heard of this. I'm so excited to see it.
It's really cool. It's weird and cool. It's this, it was filmed in 69 or something, 70, but it didn't come out until 73. And it was a bunch of kids who just graduated college. They went to UCLA. They went to UCLA Film School. And this woman, Christina Hornisher, had directed a bunch of short films for UCLA as a student, and they still have all of her films there. They're all surreal and kind of, it's really, really none of them are narrative. They're all very abstract, surreal things. And she brings a lot of that into this feature film that she made. And it's set in LA, and it's in the 70s, and there's a serial killer. But it's also a love story. And it's also a story about Los Angeles, and there's some really cool moments in it where the landscape of LA is really used really well as a character in the story. It's about these young people who've moved to LA, and they're trying to make it in the film industry, and they find themselves stuck making porn in this kind of sleazy underbelly of Los Angeles, and they just can't seem to get out of it. But it's not really what any of them really want to be doing. And, throughout the film, you'll see places in LA that no longer exist. There's a little storyline about this main character is taking a girl that he likes out about town, and they're looking at all the cool stuff in the city, and he takes her to a place called Bunker Hill, which today is in downtown Los Angeles, and it's just kind of ugly, rundown office buildings, and nobody really likes Bunker Hill. But back in 1900, Bunker Hill was this beautiful area with Victorian mansions. And they were all torn down. All of them were torn down basically between World War II and 1975. And in the film, it's right at the tail end of this, and he takes her to this place, and you see he's this is the last mansion. It's this beautiful Victorian mansion, and there's bulldozers tearing it down in the movie. So a lot of really beautiful things like that are captured. They have the Hollywood sign. They hike to the Hollywood sign, which you can no longer do. You can hike close to the Hollywood sign, but it's got a big giant fence around it. It's do not enter the Hollywood sign. You will be arrested immediately because of vandalism and people, killing themselves on it and stuff like that. So But in the movie back then, in the 70s, you could still hike to it. And so there's this beautiful scene of them hanging out like right under the Hollywood sign. And it uses the city really beautifully. But it's very much a horror movie, as much as it is also like an art film and a love story. So it was lost for a really, really long time.
Wow.
It came out in drive-ins, and then it kind of disappeared until 1985. And it was released in... God, I sound like such a nerd. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm obsessed.
It was
this is
released
so-
on
No,
VHS.
I'm like enraptured. I'm like, this is the shit I love. Like, it's just
like,
cool.
It's funny because I watch a lot of YouTube, and there'll be like the guy who's like, it's the, train disaster number 74 on the train disaster channel. And I'll be like, oh my God, what a nerd. And he'll be like, and then the train did this. And he's like, knows everything about train disasters. And then here I am going like, and I'm like, so everybody's got their nerd thing, I guess. So but yeah, people are into all kinds of stuff. So anyway, in 1985, it came out on VHS in the UK under a different title called Twisted Throats. And for a long time...
What a title.
Yeah, for a long time, the only way you could see the film is if you could find a DVD bootleg of that VHS. And it was super low quality, like really grainy, really, like all the colors were faded. And the first time I saw it, that's how I had to see it. When I first started researching it for the book, I finally got a hold of this bootleg, and I was like, ooh, it's so, it's just one of those movies that you watch it, and it's, like, if it was on Prime, you know how you go on Amazon Prime and you look at all the free movies, and there's all this old shit, and you put something on, you're like, ooh, I can't watch that. That print is awful. Like, you would turn it off. I do, even if it's probably a great movie, it was like that, but I had to watch it because I knew it was the only way to watch the film. So I was like, this is such a shame, Like, I wonder what this film really looked like. And then Grindhouse Releasing got a hold of the print and restored it, and now they're releasing it on Blu-ray. And I've seen the restored version, and it's like this beautiful movie. The colors are gorgeous, and it's just like I don't think cool. I think if they hadn't done that, I don't think anyone would really be able to see that movie ever. Honestly,
isn't it just like
bless
so cool?
these restorations.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, bless
We're
them.
saying the same exact thing. I think it's just like yeah. We're so lucky that we live in an era where places like Grindhouse Releasing, Vinegar Syndrome, all of these places are willing to like really put in the time and effort to restore these lost movies that we never would have seen. Like, it's just so incredible that we can just get to collect them now, and like people can appreciate them. And especially from like forgotten female directors too. It's so cool, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, there's so many lost films, like by men and women, just all over, especially the farther back you go, the more lost films there are. Oh yeah. And it's so sad because some of them are genuinely just lost forever, and we'll never be able to recover them. And we know the title and we know the synopsis if we're lucky, and that's about it, So I love the film preservation, and part of what I wanted to do with my book is I think these kind of ordinary behind the scenes stories are really fun, and they're the stories I really, really like. No film ever made was like easy. If you hear the behind the scenes story, like, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be like Terminator, it can be Gladiator, it can be whatever movie it is, and there's some story about how shit went wrong, or it was really hard, or the casting had to be changed, or the Back to the Future had to recast the actor, and everybody thought that they were going to get fired, and we couldn't carry the boat over the hill in South America, whatever. And so every film has a story. And even if it's not a famous film, even if it's not like a good film, like, there are stories of these very like real people who made these movies. And the less famous a movie is, the less likely we are to hear ever any of those stories, and especially prior to the 21st century, because right now we have things like Dread Central. We have places that are on the internet where these stories, where a lot of these stories are preserved. True. Like, if a new film comes out and you do an interview with a director, like, that's preserved up there forever. So like in 10 years, somebody can Google this director and that will come up, and they can read the real words that they said during the interview when this film came out. And that's amazing. Yeah. But a lot of films before the 20th century or 21st century do not have that. You have to find it in print, and print materials get thrown away. people who make films don't realize that the things that they have used to make their films might actually be worth something to someone. Like, so costumes or scripts or storyboards or the mask of the monster that they thought turned out bad or whatever. Like, all these things go in the trash, because you never think what you're doing is important,
Right.
And so we just, I love, as much as I can, trying to capture those little stories. And I tried as much as I could in this book, which, obviously you can't tell every story.
I was going to say, it's a daunting task.
You go insane, and some people are just not around to tell their story anymore, and there's no way to find out about it. But sometimes you can, and so when I could, I did. So,
how long have you been working on this book?
I've been working on this book an embarrassingly long time. So, I first really started. I got the idea to write this book about 20 years ago.
Okay,
and I really started my general research then. And at the time, I was writing online for horror websites. So I wrote for Bloody Disgusting for a while. I wrote for Fangoria, like in the teens, in the 20 teens. So all through this, I was a film journalist, and I was able to access a lot of filmmakers, which was really good. And that definitely helped me make some of the connections that I did in order and actually I used some of the interviews I had done for press over the years as source material for some of the interviews in this book, just depending on which ones they were.
Yeah.
But I wrote a version of the book in like 2010, and then I got my master's degree. And then I came back and reread my book, and I realized it was, like, awful. So I had to rewrite it. Because, like, now that I've spent 2 years writing and for my master's program, like, wow, I should really rewrite this. And I did. And then, but, and life gets in the way, too. And sometimes, it was like, the best way I can describe it, and you guys will understand this, is it's like writing 1,000 articles.
Yep.
In a row. Each one about a different film or a different person. Some short articles, some are much longer, depending, but yeah, it was like that. So at some point you're like on article number 700 and you're like, Jesus Christ. Like,
it's just never going to end.
And that's the thing too, is when do you end it? Right?
Yeah.
Because it's not like there's an end.
That's the hardest part. Like, I'm writing a book right now, and I'm just like, when do I decide that, like, I have to, like, just stop researching and just write it? Like, that's the hardest part, is, like, when does the research stop and the actual writing begin?
Yeah, because there's always more stuff research you can do to find out more, and there's always new films coming out that might fit whatever you're writing about, right?
Yep.
So, I had to stop. I think the last film I really write about appears in, like, 2022.
Okay.
And that was just kind of like, because I had the ability to still add things as it was going through editing. So, like, there'd be some stuff going in there. But, but ever since then, I mean, I've found films that should be in the book that aren't since then. I've found
Part two.
Films have come out since then that would be fantastic to talk about in the book that obviously are not in the book. So that's hard, And
it's hard.
You just have to decide, though. You just have to decide, and that's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
Well, and like I kind of branching off of this, you've done a lot of work with like the horror community, especially with female filmmakers, and you have the film festival you curate, and I'm just curious, like, kind of what was kind of your impetus to really jump into creating creating these communities in horror that I think are so important and like so crucial, especially for, female filmmakers. What is it, kind of what was the inspiration for you to really like jump into that?
Sure. My inspiration really was when I was a wee lass in my early 20s, in like 2005 or whatever, 2004, when I first started really writing about horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to tons of conventions. I was going to all these press day interviews that were happening in LA. And I very quickly noticed that there were way more men making these movies than women. And I had no idea why. And no one knew why. Like, if I asked somebody, nobody would have any idea. They would say, I don't know, it's probably because there aren't many women doing it. But if you ask them, why aren't they doing it, nobody would know. Not executives, showrunners, producers, directors, people were like, I don't know. And like, if there was like a horror TV series or an anthology, like a big anthology, something, you would say, well, why? I would ask them, well, why didn't you get a woman director? Because there's all men in this. And they would say genuinely, like not like sarcastically, they would say genuinely, I would love to have a woman director in this. I do not know any. We asked Catherine Bigelow, she said no, you know? And like,
yeah,
but that was like,
yeah.
they were like really like, you know, and the truth is when you have to, you know, crew up on a TV show or a film, you don't have time to do a lot of research and watch 800 films, and you have to hire who you know, who you've worked with before, who you know can do the job. And if a woman director isn't amongst those people, then they're not going to get that job, right? So, and the part two of that was at conventions, and I'm a giant horror fan. I love horror films. I love horror films directed by men. I love movies that don't have any women in them. You know, so it's not just like I only enjoy films directed by women, but
right.
I was like, it's so weird that I can go and meet Dario Argento and get his autograph, or Toby Hooper, or Wes Craven. You know, when these guys were alive, I was going to conventions and they were there, and it was great. And there were a lot of women at these conventions, but they were all actresses. And I love actresses. I love them, and I love to get their autograph and nerd out over them. But I thought it was odd that there were no women who were like the directors or anything like that. And I thought that was just so weird. And I was like, why isn't, and I started thinking to myself, like, who are the women that should be here? Like, who are the women that should be up there with, like, let's say Dario Argento or Toby Hooper?
Right.
And I was like, well, okay, Catherine Bigelow would be cool, but it's not really her thing. But I was like, but Mary Lambert would be great. Like, why isn't Mary Lambert here doing signings and meet and greets and stuff? Because people fucking love Pet Sematary.
Yeah,
it's a great film. And, you know, or Mary Harron, because, like, American Psycho is so cool. And I didn't understand why these conventions didn't have them there. And when I actually met Mary Harron and Mary Lambert, and I would ask them, it was just very clear to me that they had never been invited. It just never occurred to anyone. It wasn't like we're deliberately not inviting them, but it was just like it had never occurred to anyone that they might actually want to, you know?
Right.
And so it's just this kind of disconnect between what women are doing and what fans are able to access. And then I started meeting a lot of women who were directors, who were making their own. This is like when women really started making short, like the technology was there for digital, like probably around since like 2000. Young women were like, I'm a horror fan. I love horror movies. I want to be a horror director. I'm going to shoot my own short film. I'm going to make my low budget feature. And so the women were really starting to get into this back then, but they were having trouble getting screened at film festivals and stuff. And I don't really know why. It was like, sometimes it's because the film just isn't good and the film festival's not going to take it. That happens. But, or maybe didn't believe enough in their projects or weren't getting enough attention for their projects. So they didn't think that they would get in. So they weren't applying. It's like a combination of a bunch of that stuff. And so I had a friend named Shannon Lark, who was a director. She made a bunch of short films, short horror. And she was like, I want to show my short films at a festival, and I'm having trouble doing that. So let's just have a festival, and then I'll show my short films. And I was like, okay, great, but we can't just show your short films. And she's like, I know, I would love to show more women's films, but I don't know any. And I was like, okay, we're going to fucking find some. So we went on a mission. So I reached out, I befriended and found as many women who were actively making horror movies at any budget level that I could. And I found out that there were actually enough to do a film festival. So we had the first Viscera Film Festival, which is what it was called, in 2007. And it was like 10 films. And we had to find the films. It wasn't like people were submitting them. It was like I had to reach out and be like, hey, I heard you have a film. Can I see it? We want to show it. And then we did it again and again and again. And by 2010, we were getting like shit tons of submissions because every year the amount of women making these movies was growing. So that was a big part of it. And then they found out that there was a place that was specifically looking for their films. And that helped a lot too. So by 2010, it had gotten bigger. And in 2013, Shannon left the festival to focus on filmmaking, which I don't blame her, because it had kind of become this beast that required a lot of time.
Yeah,
and it was actually like she really wanted to be a filmmaker. So, but I was like, but I'm not a filmmaker. I was like, I'm not done. I want to do this more. So, one of the women who had become involved with Viscera, named Stacey Hammond, she and I formed Etheria right after that. And we expanded it to a couple other genres, so sci-fi and fantasy also, because by that time, we'd gone from, getting like 10 films in the beginning to getting like hundreds of films. And we were like, we have to find a way to, this is like, okay. And we also decided that we were only going to focus on women directors, because previously we'd been like, the first edition was like, did you write it? Did you produce it? Did you direct it? But by like 2013, pretty much almost every film in genre has either a woman writer or a woman director or a woman producer on it. So it's kind of like, well, now we're just like a regular film festival. So we narrowed it to director, because director is the area where there are the fewest women still. And that's how Etheria was born. And Etheria shows, only 8 to 10 short films. Sometimes we show a feature at a live event, but the core, competition is really small. It's 8 to 10 films, depending on their length, and they're all our criteria is that it's just really amazing and good. And could the director, based on what we can tell, step onto the set of, let's say, a horror TV series, something like American Horror Story, or The Walking Dead, or something like that, or let's say a Blumhouse feature, like the next day, and be able to do that job. And so that's kind of like our criteria for what we're looking for in the films. And we have a bunch of judges who help us with that. And then we have these films, and honestly, the real goal of it was, so all these people who've been telling me for years, we don't know any. We'd love to hire a woman director, but we cannot find one that's qualified, that has worked in this genre, that has also who's done an action scene, or we need a woman who knows how to, wrangle dozens of extras. We just don't know any directors who can do that. Well, here they are. So
Right.
that was really the point of it. It was like now, here are, but you don't have to hire them, but you can't say that you don't know where to find them. So
wow.
Through this whole process, which pretty much became my whole life, many of the relationships I formed through Etheria have become like real true friendships. Like a lot of the filmmakers that screen with us end up becoming like my really good friends, and we stay in touch, and I look forward to their next films, or some of them, their careers have grown like crazy. Like we showed Gigi Saul Guerrero's first film, I think, or second film, short horror film at Viscera in like 2010. And then now she's like this big feature film director, and she's on television. Same with Axel Carolyn. Like we showed her first feature, Soulmate, in 2014. And she's pretty much made it in the TV horror directing world now. She's like an active working TV horror director. And so I love to follow their careers as they keep making stuff. And being able to do that over such a long period of time has given me a perspective on the film industry and TV industries, and on these women's individual careers that I wouldn't be able to have after just like a year, or after just watching their short films. So that's also a very big part of why these communities that Etheria is part of have kind of grown up around it. And also why writing the book took a long time, because by the end of writing it, I realized that I had to take that long. Otherwise, I wouldn't really know what I was talking about. It's really hard to see the big picture when you're in a small part, but when enough years go by and you can take a step back and like look, okay, what has happened the last 20 years, right? Yeah. And I know because I was there and I can see it. then I have a real perspective on the changes that have happened and the reasons that women have or have not made these movies. And it's not even just and it gets complicated. It's like the things that are true about the film industry in general are also true about women directing horror movies. Everything that affects film on any level in the industry, all the strikes or consolidation of big companies or how concentrated the money is or new forms of distribution, all of that, affects everyone in the film industry, including the subgenre of women directing horror movies. So that was a very long answer to what you asked. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, I think so.
You did.
I think so.
So, I mean, you're a huge horror fan. You have been, it sounds like, for a very long time. Can you take us back to the very beginning? How did you get introduced to the horror genre?
Okay. So I was a child of the 80s and in LA. And what that means is that you had your television and you couldn't go anywhere on your own. In LA, even back then, if you didn't have a car, you were stuck in your house because A, you can't walk anywhere, and B, it's not safe. Right. But it was also the 80s, so I would get left home alone a lot, right? My parents would go to work in the summer, and they'd be like, there's the television, have fun today. And I would I know how to cook scrambled eggs, and I would make myself food and watch the television. And so in the 80s, television, I didn't have cable, by the way, which was available in the 80s, but I didn't have it. I had, the 6 or 7 channels that you could watch.
That was me. That was me in the 80s too. Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this, but censorship was a little bit different on network television, I think, than it is today. And than it is on cable today. And by that I mean lots of curse words were cut out. You would watch Breakfast Club or whatever on TV and, instead of eat my shit, he'd say eat my socks. Yep, just be the worst dub ever. So they would never let curse words. You couldn't say bitch on television, and definitely couldn't say anything worse. But for some reason, they didn't cut out any of the violence in horror movies. I don't know why. They also didn't cut out some of the nudity. Sometimes you would be oh, that woman is topless. Okay, it's Channel 5 in Sunday afternoon on network television, and PJ Souls is topless or whatever. And so a lot of what I was exposed to, by the way, my parents were foreign and they did not give a shit about what I watched. They didn't have television growing up in their houses because they were from war-torn countries and television was the last thing on anyone's mind. And they had also experienced so much worse shit in their childhood than any of us will ever experience that they were sure, you can watch a fantasy movie about a killer. Who cares? It's not even real. Have fun.
They're you never, you don't know anything about the real horror, the real horrors of life. You'll be fine.
Exactly. No, it's true. Honestly, my mom had me late, and she was from East Germany, and right after the war. And so a lot of things that she experienced were pretty fucked up.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah. And then they came to the United States where everything in the 80s was cushy soft and paved with gold. And so they were ugh, children are fine. Let them watch what they want.
Watch your horror movies. Yeah. You'll be okay.
So I would turn on the TV and with my scrambled eggs or whatever, and all day long, alone at home. Well, my sister would sometimes be there, but she wouldn't talk to me because she was a teenager. And so she was doing her own thing.
Right.
So every day, for some reason, there would be some horror movie playing. And it was a rotating Rolodex of The Shining, Halloween, the Hammer films. What else was on? Oh, Ghost Story with Fred Astaire. For some reason, these movies were on. They would buy the rights to the film to screen, and then they would milk it for a year. They would show that film once a week. They would show the same film, and so you would watch these same films over and over and over again. And also, when I was 6, I saw. You could so back then you want to go to an R movie. Right, but you're 6 or whatever. Your parent just has to buy the tickets for you, and then they give you a thing. You get the teenager standing there just lets you right, and they don't give a fuck, right? Nope. So my sister and I saw A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 in the theater.
Oh, wow.
And I should not have seen that movie because
No.
it was terrifying. And for just terrifying. For weeks and weeks after, I just had this horrific vision of Freddy Krueger just like standing in the doorway of my bedroom and he was going to get me or whatever.
Yep.
So there were I was exposed to all of this media. Oh, VHS. So that was another one. VHS, right? So Saturday night, you go to the young kids won't remember this, but for us old people, you would go to the Warehouse, which was kind of like a Blockbuster before Blockbuster.
Okay.
And it was like a really successful VHS rental chain. And you'd go in and you'd rent a movie for Saturday night. And, you'd go in and I'd go in and my parents would be like, just pick something. I'm like, all right. The Howling. That sounds good.
And the cover looks amazing. So.
Yeah. And they didn't care. They were like, whatever. It's a werewolf. That's not real. I couldn't scare anybody. And oh my God, that movie. So there were all these things that I saw. And then the best thing in the world that ever could have happened, which is Elvira got her show Mistress of the Dark, right? Or Mistress of the Movie Macabre. And then she made that movie, Mistress of the Dark, which is amazing.
Love that movie.
But
love it so much.
All of a sudden, every Saturday night at, I don't remember what time it was. It seemed late, but it was probably like 8 or something. Movie Macabre would come on. And I just fell in love with Elvira. I was so fascinated by her because my previous exposure to women in horror movies had been either somebody who gets killed or somebody who's like this evil, soulless villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, which is kind of just the way men are portrayed too, really, to be fair. But I'd never seen a character who was the monster, but also you're on her side. You're not scared of her. And she's making fun of the monsters in the movies. She's not scared of any of them.
Right.
And she's so funny and charming. And to me, I don't know if this is true or not. You'd have to ask Cassandra Peterson. But I think that a lot of Elvira's her character, came from studying Mae West. I don't know if you guys are big Mae West fans.
I don't think I knew
It's
that.
interesting.
Okay, watch some Mae West clips. There's a bunch of really good ones on YouTube, just of her jokes and her style. Like, it's not like a ripoff of Mae, but there's a lot of Mae West in her.
Yeah, I could see that.
And Mae West sort of had the same thing where she was like this anomaly and that she was openly making sex jokes in like 1931 at a time when like that was taboo. And so as opposed to being the woman whose husband cheated on her or who was the lonely, whatever, which is a lot more common for women in those kinds of movies back then. So I loved Elvira, and I saw so many weird, cool movies from watching Movie Macabre. Just really terrible ones, really good ones. Just so many things that I never would have seen that weren't available to rent in the video store, that would never have aired on regular television, like the Hammer films, for instance. Like, I think I saw all the Hammer Dracula movies. I think I saw The House That Dripped Blood. I remember distinctly watching that. And I don't know why I believe this, but I do believe that there was something with there was a Hammer a horror series that I don't know if you guys remember this. Like Hammer's House of Horror, and actually I think it's on Blu-ray now. But I think she showed some of those at one point.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So a few of them stuck with me throughout the years, very distinctly. Dr. Sadism's Torture House or something. Like, it has like 8 different names. It's like a German Italian film that. But there's just really. And I just loved it so much. And that really kickstarted like my absolute love of horror movies, to where by the end of the 80s, I was like, this is the kind of movie I like. This is what I like.
Hell yeah.
I like
Hell yeah.
and some of them scared the shit out of me. Like, absolutely. But I love them. Normal movies can't elicit like that kind of feel. Like, there's very few, there are movies, there are like dramas every now and then we're like, oh my God, that was so fucking sad, and like I'll feel it. But really, for the most part, stories about ordinary people doing ordinary things usually don't really grab me. You know, like, I can get that in my own life. I can get, like,
right.
Oh, no, their marriage fell apart. Well, I can get that in my life for sure. So, you know, but like, the guy that comes into your dreams and tries to kill you, like, that's phenomenal. That's crazy and beautiful, and I love that. So that's where my love of horror came from.
Hell yeah. So I'm very excited to dig into your choice, but before we do, I gotta ask, as an adult, now that you've curated festivals, you've written about film, do you still get terrified at all with watching horror movies, or do you still get scared?
That's a really good question. I still fall victim to jump scares.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but I always feel cheated, like, immediately after. Like, I'll be like, oh, God damn it. You know, like, really? That's not scary. She just stepped out from behind the thing. But, like, I will, like, have that reaction. So in that sense, yes. But I think it takes, after so many years of life experience and so much exposure to, like, really violent or gory movies, it takes a lot to really upset me. But it is possible. Do you
remember the last...
Oh, yeah, I think the last movie that was upsetting to me, I don't know if it scared me, because I wasn't, like, afraid, but it upset me, but in a good way. Like, I kind of am a masochist. Like, if a movie makes me feel bad, I think but that's what it wanted to do. I think that's a success, right?
Mm-hmm.
Frankenstein's Army is one of the most gruesome, disturbing visual movies I've ever seen. And every time I watch it, like, I start out watching it and I'm like, this is really fun. I love this. And then somehow, without me noticing, by the end, I'm like, I just feel so horrible. You know, like, I feel like somebody punched me in the gut and I want to throw up a little bit. I get that from Apocalypse Now, too. So it's not always a horror movie.
That would make sense.
But yeah, I do. That sometimes there's a film that really, and I keep looking for that. Like, there's the moments of claymation and stop motion, I think, had a sense of that.
I still need to see that one.
They were grotesque.
Terry,
but the whole movie in general, it wasn't enough. Like, if the whole movie had been that might have really driven me over the edge. There were scenes in where evil lurks. That's I don't know if you guys saw that. Yeah. There were scenes in that bothered me, but overall, I don't think that the film scared me. There were scenes that I really enjoyed watching because of how violent they were or how grotesque they were, and so there are movies like that. But yeah, I'm trying to think of the last thing that genuinely scared me. When I watched some of those movies that I saw as a child that scared me, I will remember being scared. And then I'll be scared, remember, like, through nostalgia of being scared. So, like, Halloween, like, when I hear the music from the original film, it triggers me and I get a little spooked. Like, I'll be like, I just feel, even though I don't think Michael Myers is going to come in the house, but I remember.
It brings you back.
Yeah, I remember hearing that music as a kid and crying because of how, like, my neighbor, I had a teenage neighbor in the 80s who dressed up like Michael Myers one year for Halloween. And he was walking around the neighborhood, like, with a knife, because this is the 80s, right? You do that now in the LAPD, they're going to fucking shoot you.
I was going to say,
like, no questions asked. But back then, it was like, there's a guy in a Michael Myers mask walking around, but it's on Halloween, so it must be a costume. And, oh my God, I think I broke down hysterical. Like, it ruined, like, my 8-year-old Halloween or whatever. So even, I remember being genuinely terrified by that. And so when I hear that music now, I'm like, yes, I remember the feeling of fear. It's so sweet. It's like Disneyland. I don't know if you guys have been to Disneyland as an adult, but for me, Disneyland as an adult is kind of like, But then I remember when I was a kid at Disneyland, and it was magical. And I'm like, ooh, let's try to recapture that. Let's walk over here. And oh my God, look, there's this thing. Let's stand by it. And you try to recapture that the whole time.
Yeah.
So I have that with horror movies. But I have it with Disneyland too. Sorry, Disney fans.
Okay, Heidi, we've talked about your book, your work, your horror history, but what did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Oh, yes. So, Back in those long days of summer, which lasted forever, every weekday, Monday through Friday, at 12 o'clock noon sharp, the original Twilight Zone would air. So you would get 5 episodes a week of the original Twilight Zone, and I would never miss it. I would seat myself in front of the television and watch this. I loved the Twilight Zone, and everybody that I knew in my school also loved the Twilight Zone, and we were just like, oh, it's the best show. And then it's funny how I can remember the names of people I went to school with in like 2nd grade, but I cannot remember like the name of some guy I dated when I was like 26. Like, it's amazing. I don't understand it all. But Juliette Comagere had she had a birthday party, and it was a sleepover party, and we all the girls from 2nd grade or whatever were invited over, and it was like this fun party, and then we were going to watch something scary. So we went into like her family's TV room, and we all sat there, and it must have been on VHS because I can't imagine how else they would have shown it. And her dad put on Talking Tina, like, we're going to watch Talking Tina. And I was like, what's Talking Tina? The Twilight Zone episode. Oh my God, I love Twilight Zone. I haven't seen that one. And I put on Talking Tina. And as the episode is on and goes on and on, this room of little girls goes from like being like, oh my God, blah, 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 to like dead silence. And we're all just like watching this doll come alive and be evil. And by the end of it, we were all just like stone cold, just like, wow, okay, what now? Are we going to sleep? Like it just had such a profound effect on all of us. And I think one of the reasons it had a profound effect on me, well, you're 8 years old, so of course, you know, you're going to be affected by it in a way that an adult never would. But my parents had this porcelain doll in our house, okay? And it was the same size as that Talking Tina doll. Like, I don't know if you guys remember these dolls, but they were like decoration dolls. They weren't like to be played with necessarily. They were like, they had like porcelain faces, and then they have like really nice hair and like a pretty dress on. And this doll had like pale white skin and red lips.
My dad's current wife's stepmom collects dolls like that, and their entire house is full of porcelain face dolls.
No,
it's
thank you.
Like my worst nightmare. It's awful.
No, thank you. Yeah, right. I hate it. And so this doll had long black hair, and she was a very pretty doll. But she was sitting in the living room, which, according to my parents, there was a family room that you could like go to, and then there was the living room. The living room was like when people came over for Christmas and stuff. Like, you are not to go in the living room. It's got like the nice couches and the coffee table that you're not supposed to touch because you'll get stuff on it. And she was seated. This doll was seated on like a blue velvet chair in the living room.
Sorry.
And she was like, you would walk into my parents' house, and then to the immediate left was the living room, and it was open. There was no door to it. And then the stairs were right in front of you to go into your bedroom. And the doll was sitting right in the living room, staring at you right when you walked in the front door. And she would watch you as you walked all the way up the stairs. She would watch you. And then you had to run really, really, really fast, because it was like the only way to prevent her from like jumping from the couch onto you and kill you.
Yeah.
And so I guess for people who haven't seen Talking Tina, maybe we should go over what happens in it, right?
Yeah. So in Talking Tina, frustrated Eric Strader does battle with his stepdaughter Christie's talking doll, Talking Tina, whose vocabulary includes such unconventional phrases as "I hate you" and "I'm gonna kill you."
Yeah. So, and what surprised me on watching this was like, I was like, oh, this is probably where Child's Play kind of got its idea from, because there's a lot of similarities here, particularly with the way the doll says like, "I'm Talkie Tina and I love you." Like, I mean, Chucky, I'm Chucky and I'm your friend to the end, right? So like, there's like definite connections here, but I had never seen this episode of The Twilight Zone until today when I watched it for this. But what a wild episode!
Yeah, it's the cast is really good. Telly Savalas was just about to launch into his like B-movie stardom that he had. Like he's in like Dirty Dozen and a bunch of other stuff in the 60s and 70s. And the mom, I forget her name. The actress is
Mary LaRoche.
Okay, yeah. She's a big TV actress in the 60s, constantly working. And, you know, that was the thing about The Twilight Zone, too, was it was really well acted, really well directed. Not always well written, but this is one of those episodes that was really well written. And the author, I believe, the screenwriter was Charles Beaumont, who was part of that group of horror writer friends in the 50s and 60s, like Robert Bloch and Richard Matheson were part of that crowd. And then Charles Beaumont was in there, and he wrote another episode of The Twilight Zone, I believe, that wasn't very good. Anyway, he's not the best of those writers. Let me put it that way. He's not bad, but he's got some really stiff competition. So I think this might be his best work as a screenwriter. And it's this story, really, you know, all horror is a metaphor for stuff. So it takes what you can't exactly put your finger on that you're feeling or that you hate about life, and then it transforms it into something incredibly sensational that it's like in your face, you can't not get the message. But even though like in your subconscious, it might not ever really come out properly. So I love that about horror. I love that we can take, you know, some real feeling and then be like, this is what it feels like. It feels like there's a doll trying to kill you. And the story is essentially really about neglectful step-parents. It's about child abuse. It's about spousal abuse. Telly Savalas' character is this grim, horrific, not like horrific, that's the wrong word. He's an asshole. He's just this asshole. He's married this woman who has a daughter from a previous marriage. She's this sweet little girl, and he has no interest in being a dad. He has no interest in being a stepfather. He's kind of mean to his wife. You don't really know why she married him. It's strange, you know, but it's the early 60s. So what might have been implied that might not be readily apparent to us now is that back in like the early 60s, it was a lot harder for a woman to support herself and make a living, especially with a small child. So there's an element of maybe she married this guy because she's dependent on him financially and needed help. And now she's stuck, right?
Yeah.
How's she going to leave? And she watches him just being mean to her sweet little girl, and she doesn't like it. She doesn't want him to do it, but she doesn't seem to, it's not like she's saying, I'm going to leave you. She just asks him not to be mean. So, you know, I think that's really the core of the story. And so for all of us who had a parent or step-parent like that, or who were in a marriage like that, or a relationship like that, you know, we'll recognize those emotions and really connect to them. And the doll, this beautiful little doll that this little girl gets, turns out to be something supernatural. And she is going to stand up for this little girl against this asshole when nobody else really will. And I think that's a fantasy that a lot of kids have, right? That you have this friend, this savior, this person who will go so far as to actually kill your mean stepdad if he's mean enough. But you're always going to be safe with them. And they love you. I mean, I think that's the Chucky story really. Well, Chucky's a little different because you've got the ghost of the serial killer. But but for the little boy in Chucky, I think that's really the appeal for his character is he's
absolutely,
this is someone who's going to protect him and love him. And we all little kids need that. And Telly Savalas' character as a dad, he's a bully, and he's finally met someone who is his match, who he can't get rid of and bully.
And I love that it's a little girl doll. It's a doll. It's like the most femme thing you can think of like a little girl's doll with pigtails and like perfectly dressed, and she's bullying him. And he's fighting, and it just like is so emasculating, and I love it. It's just so very much like making him seem crazy. And I love this narrative. We don't usually see the stepdad's perspective, so it's like that kind of inversion of the evil stepmom with the evil stepdad.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, we don't usually see that. And I think if my very brief Google research was correct, this is actually the first case of like a possessed doll, like a cute little doll in horror, because there were like there were a couple of like the mannequins, like the talking puppets, but Tina's, if not the first, one of the first haunted dolls too in horror, which is really cool and also terrifying because yep, they've always been creepy, everyone.
The Twilight Zone has a lot of really groundbreaking stories that inspired other horror movies. Like, I don't know if you've seen, oh god, what's the title of it? It's the one where the little girl, her name is Tina in the story also, falls through into the other dimension in her bedroom. Have you seen that one?
I don't think I have.
So Steven Spielberg saw this when he was a kid growing up, and it's a little girl, and her parents can't find her. They can hear her voice coming from somewhere in the house, and she's saying like, "Help me, save me!" They call their physicist friend over, and he basically explains to them that a portal to another dimension has opened in their house, and their daughter has fallen into it, and there are like entities on the other side showing her lights, and they're telling her to like follow the light or not follow the light. There's a dog, and the dog runs in after her to save her. Eventually they do pull her out right as the door is closing, but a lot of that episode was the basis for Poltergeist.
Right.
It was something that those filmmakers, Steven Spielberg and Tobe Hooper, had seen when they were kids, and that was like, let's take this story a little further. So Twilight Zone did a lot of really groundbreaking stuff like that. There are also really dumb episodes. Like there's like a Santa episode. Like I always skip those. Like those are just the ones with like a happy, jovial tone. Like I don't like that shit.
I don't want that.
I understand that they wanted to, make lots of different kinds of stories. But Talkie Tina, by the way, growing up and my whole life, and everybody I ever talked to about it, we do call it Talking Tina. But even though it is Talkie Tina, which is a very 1950s, 1960s toy name. It's just kind of like a very generic toy name. But, that story is really one of the darkest of the Twilight Zone stories. And the best part is, are we allowed to, we're allowed to spoil things,
oh,
right?
Yeah.
Spoil away.
So the doll ends up killing Telly Savalas.
Yeah.
And the mom picks up the doll at the end. The mom loves her daughter, has not been mean to her daughter, but the doll is not having anyone's shit. And the doll to the mom is like, you better be nice too. Because if you're not, yeah. Because you can see what I can do. And the implication is like, okay, so this little girl is going to get older, and this doll's not going anywhere, right? You cannot get rid of the doll. What happens if the little girl decides to get rid of the doll? What happens if she grows up and this doll
That's the
gets
sequel
jealous?
Movie.
This doll gets jealous. This doll is still
Toy
there.
Story.
Yeah, it's
Toy
like
Story. Oh my god.
Yeah, the last scene of the episode is like really projects all of those possibilities out there, and you can see like the horror on the mom's face as she realizes what is happening and that she has killed her husband. That's not like, it's not an ending where like they kill the doll and they're all fine and dad repents and he's not, it's not that kind of ending. It's like, guess what? This is the way it is and you're stuck with this.
Well, she's left alone again. She's now again a single mom. Like maybe maybe she'll get something, because they had a nice house. Like maybe she'll stand to get something from him, but like they're alone again. And the doll, and it's just like, oh shit, back to square one. You know what I mean? Like it's still sucks shit. Like you're not mad about him dying. It's just like one of those things where it's like, okay, you killed the bad guy, but now they're back in a situation, like a more different, maybe bad situation. So
and like, what if the mom ever wanted to date again or remarry?
Nope,
yeah.
Not allowed.
What if the doll doesn't like the guy? What if the doll doesn't like the little girl's choice of friends? It's just like so fucking creepy.
Yep.
And in a way, it's like, and you don't know where this doll came. The doll came from the toy store, right? They bought the doll at a toy store. So why is it possessed? We don't know. We never hear. Is it possessed by something, or is it actually just the doll? Is it some kind of manifestation coming from inside the girl herself that she's putting into the doll, like some kind of poltergeist situation? It's really ambiguous, and
it is.
Sometimes ambiguity in horror really bothers me, but in this case, it doesn't at all. Like, I feel like the ambiguity is what's so terrifying about it. You can't pinpoint the origin of this doll or why this happened.
I love some of the dialogue in this, though, because we have, so the mom comes home with the doll and she's immediately like, you got to go upstairs. Daddy can't see it right away.
Yeah.
And so it's like right away, you're like, oh, this is not a good man. And you are buying something for your kid, and therefore he is going to go through the roof. And there's she mentions that to the father that she bought it on credit, right? So you get the idea that she doesn't have her own money, but that she's putting it on this credit. And she's going to a doctor. She's seeing a psychiatrist or something because he talks about Freudian gibberish. And the line that I love is she says, it isn't the doctor's fault she feels dejected. And it's like, ooh, that's a very quiet but like little jab at him. And I was like, okay, there is tension here. And I love the way that this unfolds. And I will admit, every single time he was with one of them, I was on edge. I think maybe because I've seen relationships like this where you gotta be, especially like in the 80s with the way fathers were, it's like you gotta tiptoe around them. Daddies have in the living room be quiet, and so you tiptoe around because you don't want to invoke the wrath of someone. And so this has a lot of that tension without showing anything or without really doing anything.
And to be honest, let's get personal. My childhood was not too far from that, what you were just talking about. Like, my father was kind of like that.
Same.
He was, he'd come home from a long day of work, and he didn't like noise, and he would yell, and you had to like put, not be yourself essentially in your own home, which is a terrible thing when you're a child. Yeah. And so I think also when I saw that episode, it scared me a lot, but at the same time, I think it's almost like a childhood fantasy of like, what if I had that? What if I had someone that would kill my enemies?
I mean, to be personal, like I was closeted for most of my life, and a lot of it had to do with me having to put on a different persona in front of my dad. And like, you would see your mom not stand up for you or do anything because she was probably kowtowed in some ways too. And so it's like, I can get that fantasy very quickly. And it's interesting because, my first, I guess, introduction to this, without really realizing that it was about this, was I think it was Treehouse of Horror number 3, where Homer brings home a talking Krusty doll.
Yes.
And he pulls the thing, and here it's a twisty thing that starts it, but here it's like the pull string, and he's supposed to say a catchphrase, but whenever Homer's alone with the doll, it says, "I'm going to kill you," or something like that. Like, it goes immediately evil, and I'm like, I thought at the time that it was sort of like a play on Chucky, right? It's like, we can't do Chucky, so we're gonna do this, and it's gonna be a killer clown because he has the knife and whatnot. But no, that is a complete redo of this thing, to include the fact that Homer, let's be honest, not exactly the best parent.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Oh my God! What's so scary though, also about The Simpsons, is like, I didn't realize this until recently, but Homer's supposed to be like 36 or something.
Oh,
like,
is he really?
Oh
yes.
my!
It's really weird. Like, they're supposed to be like, and I'm like, oh wow, okay,
oh boy.
Ooh. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Wow. Oof, it's a rough 36.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. Ooh. So, but yeah, it's an episode that kind of just works on all the different levels, and the fact that we can watch it now and still feel all of those things, like it's not dated, even though clearly it takes place, 60 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
But what happens?
The themes,
the human emotions, the themes are not dated. They work very well today.
Well, and it's just incredible how simple the stories are, but how effective they are. I mean, like, the doll is just like, the mouth doesn't move, you just hear the voice, and the head moves maybe by itself a little bit. And it's just like so simple, and how the movement is constructed, and it's just spooky. I mean, everything about it is spooky. And even though we know it takes place in the past, it still has that evergreen, like we were talking about, that evergreen feeling around it. And I think especially whatever version I watched was a really good restoration or something, because it looked real gorgeous too.
It looks really good.
It's just, it's just really amazing to see what was happening. Because I love Twilight Zone, but I hadn't seen this one, so it's just cool to continue to see how that show shaped so much of what we know of the genre today.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I highly recommend just binging all of them.
Yeah,
then,
I kind of want to now because it's
I
been
know.
forever.
I've done that before, and it's easy to forget them because it's like watching the original Star Trek. It's like I know I've seen every episode, and yet every time an episode is on, I'm like, oh, what's happening? I must have seen that episode because I know I've watched them all. But
yeah,
so there are episodes of Twilight Zone where I'm like, but there are episodes where I know everything. Like they stuck with me forever, and I know everything that happens in those episodes. And this is one of them. You know, so I do. But if you get to like the Santa episode, just skip that one. It's not that it's you might like Santa. Maybe if you like Santa, whatever, watch it. But usually those are the Rod Serling written episodes where he's the sole author are usually the most simple stories. And usually he wrote a lot of the like upbeat ones.
Really?
The best way the way I can describe, and he wrote some not upbeat ones too. But the ones where it's like, you know, the magic baseball game, or the imaginary friend that's actually a real alien, but he's nice, and then there's a comedy aspect to it. Or like he did a lot of those. But then he also did a lot of even the scary ones he wrote tend to be the most really the most simple stories with like a very what I can only describe as like a Spielberg sort of ending, where it's like super profound in your face.
Yes.
You were the monsters on Maple Street the whole time. You know, like that kind of thing. Right. I don't know if he wrote that episode, but that kind of feeling. Anyway, but he's a very good writer.
What I would love to see though, so I was curious about the doll because apparently the doll used for Talkie Tina was produced between 1959 and 1961 and marketed under the name the Briquette. But Briquette was a non-talker, and on the Twilight Zone, apparently, then this is the thing that I'd be curious about. The doll was modeled after Chatty Cathy, a popular talking doll manufactured by Mattel at the time. And the voice for both Chatty Cathy and Talkie Tina were provided by June Foray, one of the leading voice actresses of the era. And so I'm like, if I was a little girl at the time and I watched this, and then I look and I have a Chatty Cathy doll has the same exact voice.
Yes.
That's
awesome.
I'd be terrified.
Oh my god, that's incredible and also the worst. I'd be like, nope, no more.
Hey, remember on the Brady Bunch when Cindy lost her Chatty Cathy doll? Do you guys remember that?
Oh my god.
Sorry.
Oh my god, I totally forgot until just now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
and I wanted to say, I wanted to make sure to tell you guys this part. So, because there was this horrible doll in my parents' living room, right? I ended up getting a counter doll to counter that one. So she was like, and she had like, she was wearing like a pink dress, and she came up with me in my bedroom, and she sat like in my closet, and she was the good one. So I knew like she wasn't going to let the bad doll come into my room and kill me, you know? And then I think I lost one of her shoes or something, and I was like scared that I'd ruined our relationship or something. But I just remember needing to have this other doll, and like I never told my mom. I was never like, I need the doll to protect me from the evil doll that you have in the living room because I saw that Twilight Zone episode. Like I never said that. I was just like, I like this doll.
You would never tell your parent you actually thought that. You just be like, no, I just really like this doll. Like I'm not crazy. Don't worry about it. Like it's fine.
And then with my other very distinct memory regarding this whole doll thing is that around the same time, one of my favorite things to do at slumber parties or with new friends that I just met, like, you know, when you're a kid and you just meet a new friend at the pool or whatever and you start hanging out, was to tell ghost stories. Yes. And I had a go-to ghost story, and it was a little girl, and I don't think I made this up. I think I heard it and then just kind of told it my own way, I think, because it's very too creative for me. So little girl, and she gets this doll, and you don't have to explain like why or how because you're a kid. She gets this doll, and then the doll is like her best friend. She loves the doll. She takes it home, and then that night she wakes up and the doll's not there, and she goes, and then she hears like weird noises, and then she goes back to bed, and in the morning the doll is there, but she's got blood on her fingers, and her dad is dead, And the whole family's like, oh my God. And then the next night, because of course you all stay in the house, right?
Yeah,
of course.
The next night,
yeah.
same thing happens, except in the morning, the doll has veins under her nails, and her mom is dead. And then, like, the third night, it's like her sister dies, and then there's, like, something even grosser under her fingernails in the morning. And then the little girl's like, hey, wait a minute, I think the doll is killing my family. And then the little girl is like, I have to leave the house. So she packs up a bag and she leaves the house, and as she turns to look up at her house, up in the window, there's the doll, and the doll is like waving at her.
Ew, I hate
That's the story.
Ew,
That's the story. That's exactly
That's
the way
amazing.
I told it. Yeah, and I was
That's
like,
amazing.
"Isn't that awesome?"
And they were all like, "We're not coming over ever again."
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. That's like
That's
something I would have
amazing.
told as a kid.
It seemed like a really great story when at the time. It could use a little, it could use a little embellishment. So I'll work on that. But yeah, I remember distinctly that as a result of that Twilight Zone episode, that was why I always wanted to tell that scary story.
Hell yeah.
That's amazing.
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
Is there anything else we want to touch on before we wrap up and give this our rating out of 5?
I think I'm good.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, Terry,
Yeah.
you're up first. How many talkie Tinas out of 5 do you give this episode of The Twilight Zone?
Here's the thing. Like, I grew up watching the old Twilight Zone episodes because my dad was a big fan of them. I don't recall ever seeing this one. I might have because, you see them, like, there's so many of them. So I might have probably seen it, but I have no recollection of seeing this one. So I was really surprised because I was like, immediately we are talking about big issues, a woman's autonomy, the fact that, there's this little kid, there's abuse, there's like there's a lot of heavy subjects. And I was really surprised, and it made me go, I want to rewatch all of Twilight Zone again because I want to see that kind of connective tissue. And I was kind of worried maybe a little bit because this is the final season of it. I was like, sometimes the quality goes downhill, but like this season also had probably one of the biggest ones, the airplane one. I'm forgetting what it's called. Nightmare at 20,000 feet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And so and I'm like, no, they were strong until the very end. And so this one surprised me. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to probably give it 4 talkie Tinas out of 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
I think I'm also going to give it 4 talkie Tinas out of 5. I also hadn't seen this one. I don't know how, but I just have no memory of watching it. But I also I'm so glad I've seen it now because obviously this is where the modern doll, horror dolls come from. The kind of, Dead Silence and movies we think about. We think of the creepy doll. This was really the first one. And boy, oh boy, she's still real creepy. I feel like it's so easy for creepy dolls to kind of wear off. The creepiness kind of wears off sometimes, but this is such a good example of how to do it in the right way. She doesn't look so different, but there's just something just uncanny enough that she's creepy.
Simple and effective.
It's simple, it's creepy, and I don't know, seeing it from the parents' perspective in this way particularly, instead of it trying to be explicitly this child is being abused, it's so much more vague. And I, like you were saying, Heidi, I love how vague it keeps it, and it kind of lets your imagination run wild in a way that is scary. And so I really appreciate this episode. So I would give it a 4. So Heidi, I will pass to you. You have the final word. How many talkie Tinas out of 5 do you give this episode of Twilight Zone?
I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 because I picked the episode. And because I think there are probably only maybe 5 Twilight Zone episodes that I would really give that to. This is one of them. So yeah, this is just such an effective story, and it would be a very different. If you look at it like it's a short, it would be very different if Telly Savalas was played by someone else. There's little subtle things like when he tries to burn the doll. And, he's taking it a step further, and you realize, this guy might actually be capable of physical violence. That's what it made me think of, is he's willing to take it somewhere. Yeah. So what are the implications about, maybe hitting the kid or his wife, Yeah. And so I give it a 5 out of 5.
Heck yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for joining us to talk about this episode of The Twilight Zone. Are you online? Where can the listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away with whatever you can talk about and share.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, and I really, really am so glad to have been able to do this. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Everybody who wants to know what they can look me up about and this and that, my book is out, and that's really probably the biggest thing for me right now is my book, I Spit on Your Celluloid, The History of Women Directing Horror Movies, is available online. If you just Google it, it'll come up. There's different bookstores that have it, that are selling it online. Most comic book shops and specialty bookstores have it in stock. I know that Barnes & Noble has it, so you can find it. It's also on Amazon. You can just buy it on Amazon. That's what I do a lot of the time. It's just easier. And there are there will be a Spanish language version and a French language version in 2025. Ooh. In case English is not your first language and you want to read it in those languages. You can also find me through my film festival, Etheria, Etheria. By the way, the name Etheria is the home planet of She-Ra. I don't know if anybody knows that. But yeah.
I just put that together.
One of the things that I loved as a kid was He-Man and She-Ra.
I love She-Ra.
He-Man is from Eternia, and She-Ra is from Etheria. So that's where the name Etheria came from. And we are actually open for submissions for short films on September 1st. We open pretty early in the season, and our festival is not until next June again. But we like to have a really wide submission phase so that we can watch all the films as they come in. And, some people will have a finished film now. Some people won't have one until March. So we want to make sure we have a big bucket to catch everybody's films in so we can see them all. So if you just Google Etheria Film Festival, that will come up. You'll find our website. We're on Film Freeway. And I'm on Instagram, but it's just me, posting bullshit. So, but if you want to add me, go ahead. I'm happy to share bullshit with you. So.
Hell yeah. And we'll have all of that stuff in the show notes, everybody, for all the links and all that good stuff. So, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Talkie Tina and this episode of The Twilight Zone? You can let us know by sending us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on social media. I am at MB McAndrews on Twitter and at MB.McAndrews on Instagram.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful everywhere.
And of course, follow the podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scarred Podcast, and on Instagram at Scarred for Life Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.